Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. I'm Kayla and it's time to crack into a good book. So today's video is going to be catching up on more January book reviews. I know I've been terrible at filming again, sorry about that, but you know, things are busy and we're actually going to be moving later this month into our new house, so that's exciting, but you know, lots of busyness ahead. So yeah, before we get started, leave a bear emoji in the comments to let me know that you're here. I have 18 more books to get through in January, so I've decided to split this up into 2 more videos, so each one will be 9 books instead of like the 10 books that I had been kind of doing. But anyway, and then we'll get to February and then March, so lots of things on the horizon. So like always, we'll move from the lowest to the highest rated. We'll start off with some 3.5-star books. The first one is Soulstar by C.L. Polk. So also I want to like preface this, I guess, by saying a lot of these books I read when I had COVID, so that may have affected some of my enjoyment levels, but you know, just FYI. So anyway, this is adult. I would describe it as historical urban fantasy, even though it's not set in our world. It gives me very much like a historical urban fantasy vibe. So this is the 3rd book in this series, and all of these are kind of, they follow different characters, but it's all in the same world, and the same characters do reappear. So here we follow Robin, who has just kept her head down and hidden her magic that would have seen her imprisoned. However, change has come to Kingston, and the witches have been freed. So Robin must try to ensure a freer, more just future for the country, as well as generally deal with her feelings for her childhood love, who vanished into an asylum years ago. So this was probably my least favorite of the series overall. It does seem, I think, more relevant to a lot of things going on in our world today, and it does mention things, you know, like reparations and wanting a voice. So, like, these things are important, and this book obviously deals a lot more with politics, and I think I may have just, this may not have been the right time for me to read this book. I just really wasn't in the mood for this type of story when I read it, and I think I much preferred the first book, Witchmark, which does have more of a mystery to it. So I think the pacing here was okay overall. I did struggle to get through some sections because I just wasn't overly invested in the politics, but I still enjoyed the world overall. I think it feels rather cozy, and I like reading these books in the winter because it does feel like, you know, there's a lot of winter storms, so the atmosphere feels really cold, and that's kind of the vibe I generally want in the winter. So we do spend more time focusing on the witches here, which was nice to see. Some of these witches have been thrown into asylums, while others have just hidden their abilities. So these witches were rather interesting. They do have more of a clan-type structure where they live with their extended families, and I really liked the family connections and how important family is to the characters. Their culture is also very accepting of lots of things, including non-binary individuals and polyamory, even though the rest of society doesn't really accept this. This book did make for an interesting change of pace because we have focused more on the nobles in previous books, and this is more like the common people, I guess. So we do follow our main character, Robin, and I thought she was pretty nice overall. She is an older protagonist, which was interesting, and she's waited for her past love, who was put into an asylum years ago. So she's thrown herself into politics and helping her clan, and she's trying to enact change. I mostly liked the romance and thought it was sweet to see them come back to each other and see if they could fit together again, even if it is a slow process. It's nice to also see a non-binary character in this world, so I really liked how Zeland is smart, resourceful, and very inventive. So Zeland is the one who was thrown into the asylum and has an understandably rough time, you know, being in the asylum and then struggling to recover from this experience. I also like getting to see Grace and Miles again, and they were the main characters in the previous 2 books, though I will say I could have used more Miles because he is my favorite character, I think. So Grace does try to help and be a good ally here, though she doesn't always get things right. But I think, like, at least with her, she's open to learning things, so that's nice. So overall, I think this was a solid conclusion to the series, even if it wasn't my favorite installment, and I would definitely recommend the series as a whole, especially if you're looking for books with diversity that have this cozy, kind of like historical urban fantasy setting. The next 3.5-star book I'll talk about is The Bone-Shard Emperor by Andrea Stewart. So this is the sequel to The Bone-Shard Daughter, and this is adult fantasy. So Lynn's struggles are just beginning, her people don't trust her, and her political alliances are weak. And we've also got this rebel army of constructs gathering, as well as powerful magicians of legend who have returned. So I will say this was a bit of a step down for me compared to the first book, though, like, obviously I still enjoyed it. It felt like the pacing was a bit of a struggle here at times, perhaps because we weren't learning about bone shard magic as much, but this seemed to still stall out a bit for me. I think the plot here was more about politics and stopping an uprising, which wasn't as interesting for me. I guess, like, I feel like with Soulstar in this, reading about like political fantasy was just not what I was in the mood for at the time. However, we do get some action and exciting moments here, as well as some new reveals, which were mostly cool, and you know, some of them I actually did predict, so I was pleased with myself. And obviously, like, I definitely want to read the next one, especially since there's some very interesting consequences and things learned here, which could very much, like, affect things moving forward, which I think will be fun to see. Like I said, I did miss the bone shard magic, though, and the constructs here compared to the first book. We do get to see these elements a little bit, but focus is more on these Alanga, which are these, like, magicians of legend. The world continues to be great, though. I really like all of the different islands and this general Asian-inspired setting and atmosphere. The islands are sinking for some mysterious reason, and we do learn more about this, though there are still some mysteries to be uncovered here. Lynn, I think, is still a very cool character. She's trying her best to protect her people, but has an uphill battle because people really don't want to support her. I did feel bad for her because she is genuinely trying to help, and people just won't give her that chance. I also really like her bond with Thrana and how she uses her abilities and intelligence in, you know, the plot. So, Jovis was alright here. I think he has a lot of waffling back and forth with which side to support, which did get a little bit frustrating for me at times. I did really like getting to see his mom as a side note. I thought that was fun. And I really do continue to enjoy his bond with Mephi, though it doesn't seem as playful here compared to the first book. And then we do also have point of view sections from Falu and Renami again. I continue to like Falu, though I don't really like Renami as much. I think Falu seems to be a good person who wants to help her people, but Renami kind of puts Falu into some awkward situations politically and doesn't seem to want to compromise at all to protect their people, which is a little frustrating. Generally speaking, I would say there are several characters throughout this book who are just too proud to compromise and actually work together, which annoyed me. So we do have some new characters introduced here as well, including Ayesh, who will be fun to follow more, I think, in the next book. So I did like the Bone Shard Daughter, obviously, a lot more than this installment, but I think this series still holds a lot of promise, and, like, I obviously still like this. And I really can't wait to see what happens next. I think the next book will be fabulous. So I would still recommend the series overall, especially if you like island settings, you know, cool magic, and this Asian-inspired world. The last of the 3.5-star books I'll talk about today is The Maid by Nita Prose. So this is adult mystery, and we follow Molly, who struggles with social interactions and has her grandmother interpret the world for her to create rules to live by. Since her grandmother's death, however, Molly has thrown herself into her work as a hotel maid. And then, you know, her early life is upended one day when she discovers a wealthy guest dead in his bed and becomes the lead suspect. So I liked this overall, but it was hard to read at times because I felt awkward and bad for Molly. So the pacing, I think, was decent. It does keep things moving, but it's like broken up into days, and I think some days definitely felt slower pace or a bit more of a struggle. I did like how everything came together in the end. I think, you know, it's pretty clear that Molly has been taken advantage of, and I was definitely able to put things together quicker than she was. So, like, but, you know, I think there were still some surprises, but I think some of the struggle with this book was, like, me, like, being very aware of what's going on and being like, oh my god, Molly, come on, you can do it, like, get it together. But I think, you know, there were some pieces of the mystery that were interesting with some, like, good people in bad situations and some bad people who are, like, taking advantage of these people or forcing them into these situations. So, yeah, it's kind of like a mixed experience. I think positive overall, but I don't know. There were some things that were more questionable, I guess. So Molly was great, I thought, and it's really nice to read from her point of view. I think she's meant to have autism, though it's never explicitly said in the book. And I think it's nice to read from her point of view, like I said, and be able to see what it's like to not always be able to pick up on social clues. She does try her best, but it's hard without her grandmother, who has previously explained all these things to her. Others think she's weird or that her mannerisms are strange, but it's a lot of, like, judging her without really knowing her. She likes rules and to know where she fits in, which I can definitely understand. And I think she's very focused on cleaning because it's her job, but she doesn't always know the appropriate time to do things. I did really root for her, though, and absolutely love certain elements of the book where she realizes who her true friends really are. So in terms of the other characters, I want to keep this kind of vague since it is a mystery, but some are very sweet, and I really like seeing them interact with Molly. Others are definitely not as nice, so I, like, very much wanted Molly to avoid them. So overall, I think this was a very satisfying murder mystery with some close circle mystery vibes with it being set in this hotel. But that being said, I don't think this will necessarily work for everybody because it does depend on how much you like Molly as a character. And I think there's some level of frustration that could come in there if you're kind of in that same situation where you're like, yes, I know what's going on, and you just, like, want the other characters to pick up on that as well. So, but overall, I think this was still a an enjoyable murder mystery, and I would still recommend it. So now we'll move to some 4-star books, and the first one I'll talk about is Mickey 7 by Edward Ashton. So I did receive this for review from the publisher through NetGalley, and this came out February 15th. So this is adult sci-fi where we follow Mickey, who's an expendable, and this is essentially a disposable employee who gets cloned or regenerated each time he dies. And so he's sent to help colonize this ice planet. On a routine mission, Mickey 7, the 7th instance of Mickey, goes missing and is presumed dead, so a new clone, Mickey 8, is created. But duplicates are prohibited, so Mickey 7 and 8 end up having to work together to keep their dual existence a secret and also deal with, struggles of generally trying to survive on this inhospitable planet. So I liked this overall. It's pretty fast-paced, and I really liked the ideas that come up here with the expendables and just, clones, and generally trying to, terraform the land to make a viable colony. There were some nice mysteries happening here with Mickey 7 trying to figure out what to do about the situation he finds himself in, as well as what's happening with the creepers, and these are a species who are native to the planet. I did predict some things accurately, but there were definitely some surprises here as well. So the setting feels very cold and barren, which is perfect for reading in the winter. The book mostly takes place inside, on space station type things, but we also have expeditions out onto the planet, and I found both of these settings to be quite interesting. We do have some flashbacks as well to, before and during the journey to get to this planet. Some of them are pretty horrific, but rather interesting, and I think the idea of expendables is interesting and alarming, and there's, some kind of questionable ethics that come up because they're basically used as guinea pigs for times, because they are expendable and you can just regenerate stuff. So it's the dangerous missions where you're okay, go into this radioactive area to fix this, send in an expendable. So, it's some interesting things to think about, I guess, with that. So Mickey 7 was fun to root for overall. He has made some dumb choices in his life, but I definitely wanted him to succeed. I think he wants more from his life, and this in part affects why he signs up for the job, as well as his behavior while on the planet. In general, again, while he does make some dumb choices at times, he does have some clever moments as well, which is nice. I enjoyed seeing him try to figure out what to do after he becomes this multiple, and I had fun with them pretending to be one person. Generally, I think, like I said, there's some interesting philosophical ideas with them being clones. Even though they should theoretically be the same person, there are definitely differences between Mickey 7 and Mickey 8. Mickey doesn't have the best choice in friends overall, but there are some interesting explanations about that come up throughout the book. Nasha, who's his lover, seemed fun and easygoing, and I did really like her. I think she's very accepting, and I liked how she stood by him. One of his other friends was very full of himself and really just didn't think about others but himself most of the time. And this kind of calls into question just how good of a friend he really is, but that's that's another issue, I guess. The creepers, which are the species on the planet, were rather interesting as well. I thought of them as giant ants for some reason, but I think they're maybe more like centipedes. But either way, I think there's some interesting developments that come up with them that I had fun with. So overall, I definitely had a good time with this and would recommend it. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is ReDawn, and this is by Brandon Sanderson and Janci Patterson. So this is YA sci-fi, and this is the second novella in the Skyward series. So here we follow Alanik, who crash-landed on detritus and is searching for allies for her people to fight the superiority. However, one faction back on ReDawn, her planet, wants to appease the superiority, and Alanik must join forces with Jorgen, FM, and others to fight. So this novella was pretty enjoyable, and it definitely escalated the situation compared to the previous novella. It is pretty fast-paced overall with lots of action. It's particularly nice to learn more about the other cultures in this world and this planet ReDawn. We get to learn more about Alanik's people, as well as Alanik herself, which was rather fun. There are more Cytonics in their society, so she actually knows more about their powers than the humans, which is, we've mostly followed. So on this planet, we do have these two political factions that previously existed, not quite in harmony, but it's one of those situations where one doesn't really have power over the other. But now, one of these factions wants to side with the superiority, which, is not good. There were some interesting political issues, I think, with both this culture and the humans as they deal with the superiority. So I do continue to really enjoy learning more about the slugs in this world, and I think they're adorable. I think the events that happen in this particular novella will really affect what happens in Cytonic, so I really can't wait to see what happens next. In terms of Alanik, I think she's fun to learn more about, and I did mostly enjoy following her. She learns more about the humans and their culture, especially what they've grown up with doing, particularly with fighting. I think she's kind of thrown into some serious war action instead of gains like her culture plays. So there is a bit of a learning experience for her, certainly. I do like seeing her realize what she is and isn't okay with in the grand scheme of things. She is desperate to get allies for her people, and she's willing to trade information to get help. So we see her reconsider some of her decisions from the first novella, and I do think she grows a bit here. We also get to see some other members of Skyward Flight again, so, I mean, admittedly, this is mostly focused on Jorgen, but others come back as well. So, overall, I enjoyed this, but I think it kind of lacks that obsessive reading quality of the full books, and it could just be because, you know, it's like Brandon Sanderson writing the full books versus more Janci Patterson writing this, but I think, like, overall, this does a pretty good job of matching the tone and whatnot of the full books, but it's like, yeah, just something slightly holding me back, I guess. But anyway, I am very excited to read Cytonic as well as the final Skyward novella afterwards, so I would recommend this if you're a fan of the Skyward series. I think you are supposed to read it the first two are supposed to be read between books 2 and 3, and then the third novella is supposed to be read after book 3, but just for reading order. But yeah, so like I said, would recommend this. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is The Quicksilver Court by Melissa Caruso. So this is adult fantasy, and this is the second book in Rooks and Ruin series. So here we're definitely dealing with the fallout of book 1, and demons walk the world. Tensions are growing, and Rix and her allies must set out to find a powerful artifact. So this was a good sequel, but I didn't feel like it was quite as strong of a book as the first one. I did somewhat struggle with the pacing here a bit more in this book, and it did feel like there were more moments where things were drawn out a bit, or it felt like the plot wasn't really progressing as quickly as I would have liked. The world continues to be great, though, and I do really like how we have these, like, 2 countries that we mostly focused on. One of them, which is more of, like, the setting of these books, has these witch lords, and then the other, which was the setting for most of the original trilogy, which was more, like, Italian-inspired, and that's more political, with some mages whose power is kept under control. So there's an interesting variety of powers here again, and I liked learning more about Rix's abilities. Things are definitely more dire here with demons walking the land, which does make things rather interesting. So we do get some more cool abilities with the demons, and we get some rather creepy moments with nightmares and controlling people. So this book mostly takes place in one court, which did get a bit older after a while, and I think that may have kind of been some of my issue with the book. Like, it should have increased the tension more just being in this, like, sort of locked room type setting, but I just kind of struggled with it. I will say there are some surprises, though, that provide an interesting direction, and I definitely want to see what happens next. So, Rixander continues to be a really enjoyable protagonist. I think she's pretty smart, but she's very lonely and isolated because of her powers, and these are more destructive, and so they've kind of prevented her from being able to, like, have contact with people. So she tries to make the best of the situation, even though she has to make some tough choices, and she's warned about the consequences of certain decisions in this book. Rix does want to protect her friends, though, which I found really compelling. So I do think she's judged somewhat unfairly at times, even though, like, it makes logical sense for these characters to think these things, but at the same time I'm like, I don't want you to think that. So I really like what seems to be a developing relationship between Rix and Severin. It's a very slow burn romance and didn't progress as much as I would like. Like, again, slow burn, emphasis on that. But it definitely feels like they would be a good match for each other. I did get a little bit frustrated with the other characters, though, mostly the ones who are in the rookery. I think there's a lot of secrets being kept, which cause all sorts of problems, and I also feel like some of these characters are a bit hypocritical at times. Severin, again, though, is great. He doesn't judge Rix at all, and I think he's really understanding and supportive of her. I feel like he didn't do as much here as he necessarily could have, but he's still enjoyable to have around. I also liked getting to see some of the demons up close and personal. Some of them are more sympathetic than others, certainly. So even though this wasn't as strong for me as The Obsidian Tower, which was book 1 in the series, I'm still absolutely going to be rereading the next installment. I would definitely recommend this series, as well as the previous trilogy, the Swords and Fire trilogy, which does take place before this, but yeah, I mean, I think it's a really strong adult fantasy series, and I can't wait to see what happens next. The next 4-star book I'll talk about is Grave Reservations by Cherie Priest. So this is adult urban fantasies / paranormal cozy mystery. So we have our main character, Nita, who's a psychic travel agent, and one day she impulsively rebooks a detective's flight saving his life. Grady, this detective, realizes that Nita's abilities might just be able to help him crack a cold case. So this was quite entertaining. I found this to be really funny and mostly fast-paced, and I definitely wanted to know all the connections between people and, you know, solve the case, of course. So the book does take place in Seattle, which I thought was a fun setting, and I thought the overall mystery was pretty great. I did not predict all of the intricacies to the case, so it kept it fun to learn about everything and, you know, have me put the clues together. I really liked Lita as the main character. I thought she was really entertaining, and, you know, she's not always the smartest, but she's well-intentioned and does try to do her best. I really liked her abilities with psychometry and her premonitions. Psychometry in particular is something that I do enjoy seeing in books. Basically, it's like where you can touch an object and see it's a history of some sort, but I found it really fun here to see her try to hone her abilities with things like clairvoyant karaoke, where she, like, basically has people from the audience, like, give her an object, and she will sing a song based on that, and, like, generally the goal is for that to, like, mean something to that person. So that was a really fun idea. So Grady, the detective, was also a great character. I liked him, especially with how he's willing to work with Lita on this cold case, and this actually did give me Psych vibes, like that show, because I really liked it. But Lita actually does have abilities here. He's willing to bend some rules to get answers to these cases, and I enjoyed how he lets Lita's friend come along, even though it's, you know, probably not the right thing to do in terms of protocol. But Grady is there to help, and I liked watching the friendship develop between him and Lita. I also found Lita's best friend to be pretty entertaining. I think she's there for Lita and encourages her a lot. So I definitely had fun with this book and would read on this in this series. I've actually read one of Cherie Priest's other books in the past, which I didn't really like all that much, so I was pleasantly surprised with how much I enjoyed this. So I think if you're looking for a fun urban fantasy / paranormal cozy mystery, I definitely recommend picking this series up. The last of the 4-star books I'll talk about is A Blizzard of Polar Bears by Alice Henderson. So this is adult thriller, and this is the second book in this Alex Carter series. So we follow wildlife biologist Alex, who gets a job studying polar bears in the Canadian Arctic. As her study progresses, things start to go awry, and she realizes someone doesn't want her to complete her study. Her helicopter actually catches fire, and they're forced to land on the ice far away from civilization, so she has to rely on her skills and tenacity in order to survive. So this was good, but again, I didn't love it quite as much as the first book. So I think there were sections here that felt repetitive, especially in the beginning, where each of her days kind of has the same sort of motions, she does the same sort of thing. So, you know, I think the book overall was mostly fast-paced, but I did struggle some because it took a while for some plot threads to start to connect. I didn't entirely guess what was going on, so that was nice. And we do get some answers for mysteries introduced in the previous book, which were also very interesting. I didn't see some of these coming at all, and definitely wonder what's going to happen next. So in general, though, I think this was a step down for me from the previous book, again with the pacing. I think A Solitude of Wolverines in particular had a bunch of exciting things, while this felt a bit toned down. The setting was very enjoyable, though. It obviously feels very cold, and I liked being out on the ice. I also really liked how this had some survivalist elements as well as some scuba diving. So I think this was perfect to read during the winter because, again, I wanted that cold setting. So we also have a lot of scientific details, again, which are really interesting and cool to learn about, at least for me, but this might bog down some readers. I also continue to really like the message of the importance of conservation, and I think this particular book deals with global warming and how this has affected polar bears. So that's really interesting, and I think, I like how these books are incorporating thriller elements with, like, conservation in nature. So I liked learning more about the bears here and seeing Alex try to track them and study them. Alex, I think, was mostly enjoyable again, though she didn't feel quite as clever to me as in this one compared to the first one because it did take her a while to put things together. I still really like her as a character, though, especially with how invested she is in protecting wildlife. We do get to learn more about her background, which was great and interesting, and I think it helps set up her motivations more. We also get to see more of her ruthless side here, which, when it comes to survival, which is entertaining. Again, I think this book does have some surprising moments. We have a lot of new characters in particular, again, this new setting, and some of these characters are nice and helpful while others may have ulterior motives. So I definitely wonder if we'll see them, one in particular, again. So in general, while I didn't love this as much as A Solitude of Wolverines, I still thought it was a very solid book, and I'll absolutely be continuing the series and would recommend this if you're interested in, like I said, these thrillers that can involve conservation and nature as well. The last book I'll talk about today is a 4.5-star book, and that's The Last Graduate by Naomi Novik. So this is adult urban fantasy, and this is the second book in the Sholomance series. So Elle, Orion, and our other students are back facing their final year in this Sholomance. Elle is determined to get her group through the deadly ritual of graduation, but the school is throwing more obstacles in her way. So I really enjoyed this and thought it was a great sequel to A Deadly Education. I think the writing continues to be more of like what I would describe as like stream of consciousness type writing, though not exactly that. So this may not be the best fit for everyone. However, I found it to be really engaging and rich with descriptions, even though like I'm generally not a fan of stream of consciousness type writing. And again, it's not exactly that, but I don't know how else to describe it really, I suppose. But anyway, the pacing is pretty good overall, and it definitely kept me interested and wanting to find out exactly what would happen. I think the plot didn't necessarily go the way I originally thought, but once it started down that path, I did predict something that ended up happening, which I'm not mad about. So I'm definitely curious to see how this plays out in the next book. I think the atmosphere and setting continue to be wonderful. It's very much this dark academia vibe, which is great, and I love this creepy school with the assorted Maleficaria that try to kill the students. We get some new areas here, including the gym where the seniors train on runs to prepare them to survive graduation. So this was quite exciting, and I really like seeing what all they had to face and the strategies that they incorporate into their plan that arise over time. I think Elle continues to be pretty prickly and entertaining. Again, I think she may not be the type of character who works for everybody, but I really like her. She's still trying to resist her destiny as a dark sorceress, which causes her to be low on mana to power her spells. I love seeing how she's changed over time and how she's reluctantly drawn into forming friendships and actually protecting people. She often does think the worst of others, and sometimes she waffles on decisions and kind of goes through the same infuriating thought process where she's really stubborn. So I will say this did get a little bit repetitive here, which was the main drawback for me, and that's probably why I think I didn't think it was a full 5 stars. But obviously, this was still a very strong book. But, overall, I do really enjoy her as a main character, and I like seeing how she tries to take on the challenges of the school. I also really like the friendships and relationships here. Orion continues to be entertaining as well, being this hero-type character. We do get to learn more about him in this installment, and I feel like he and Elle are a good fit together. I really like seeing what happens with them here as well. So Elle's team and friends are great. I think they're useful to have around, and they really are true friends to Elle and help her to be a better person. So I will absolutely be reading the next book, which I think comes out in September or October, and I just can't wait to see what happens. I do have some theories based on the title of the next book and, the direction of this book. However, I think there's some wrenches thrown into plans here, so I really can't wait to see how everything shakes out. So I would highly recommend this series, especially if you're a fan of dark academia and murderous school settings and, just urban fantasy in general. I think this is such a fun series. So with that, those are the books that I'm going to talk to you about today. Let me know in the comments if you've read any of these books or think you might pick them up. And for your question today, we'll just go, have you read sequels in series that are not quite as good as the previous installment? Clearly there were a few of those here, but overall I think it was still, these were still solid books, so that was good. It wasn't I hated any of them. So, positive things here. So anyway, I do have a Discord channel, and if you want to join that, the link's in the description below. I hope you're all having an excellent day and are reading something awesome. If you enjoyed this video, feel free to give it a big thumbs up, so that would certainly help me out. But with that, I think I'm going to wrap it up here and see you in the next one.